Hey there. Quick question. Do you know why we're in Syria? Today, the UN had a press conference on sovereignty and peace, and the main topic was Syria and why the U.S. is involved. Let's check out this short clip before I tell you what I think.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here today and speaking for the Hands Off Syria Coalition. Just to say, on my own previous trips to Syria, the most difficult thing is to come back to the United States with a message on the role of the U.S. war and the way in which the United States has instigated through many criminal alliances this war on Syria, this effort to completely destroy Syria. And so the formation of the Hands Off Syria Coalition is a huge step forward in building a common understanding within the political movement in the United States of the causes of the war, the reason for the war, and the way toward peace. We're especially honored that Eva Barlett, a Canadian journalist, and today so appropriate with what's the developments in the General Assembly, that a Canadian journalist is here to respond.
Before we go further, Eva Bartlett is a Canadian journalist, as the young lady was saying, and she just recently returned from Syria. She has a lot of information on the subject, first-hand knowledge. Let's fast forward and see what she has to say.
On November 4th, we were at the Castello Road humanitarian crossing. This was a day that was meant to allow the people in eastern areas of Aleppo that were inhabited by terrorists to evacuate. And this was not the first time. On prior occasions, the Syrians and the Russians had opened 8 humanitarian corridors to enable people to leave. These were attacked by terrorist factions heavily. Even that day on November 4th, the Castello Road crossing was attacked twice with mortar shelling when we were there and 5 times afterwards. Clearly, there has been political will and intent by the Syrian government and its Russian allies to enable civilians to leave, to minimize any sort of loss of human life. Clearly, the terrorists that declare themselves liberators of Syria do not want people to leave. They've been holding civilians hostage. And if you're following reports that are not BBC and that are not New York Times, you will see countless testimonies of civilians, of the 100,000 civilians who've been liberated the last week, saying, thank God for the Syrian Arab army that liberated us, and the terrorists were hoarding food, they were preventing us from having food. This is all documented.
Wow. That's pretty serious. You get the wrong impression. This lady is talking about more than just one day and one situation. I'm condensing a lot of information just so you can get a better understanding of what is really going on. We're going to fast forward a little bit, and we're going to see how some of the more established media responds to this situation. Take note as to who's in the crowd and who's paying attention to this UN press conference on sovereignty and peace in Syria. Check this out.
Thank you, very informative. Thank you very much. Now we are open to questions, if there are questions. The gentleman in the back.
Thank you very much. I'm Christopher Ronneberg with the Norwegian newspaper Aftenposten. A question for, or 2 questions for Ms. Bartlett here. As a journalist, I'm sure you can appreciate getting other impressions than empirical impressions from the ground. When you talk about the Syrian people and what the Syrian people want, how can you quantify that? Do you have any independent surveys where you can actually document that? And secondly, you talk about the corporate media, the Western media, the lies, and all of this. Could you explain what you think might be the agenda from us in the Western media, and why we should lie, why the international organizations on the ground should lie, why we shouldn't believe all these absolutely documentable facts that we see from the ground. These hospitals being bombed, these civilians who are talking about the atrocities that they have been experiencing. How can you justify calling all of us liars? Thank you.
I mean, there are certainly honest journalists amongst the very compromised establishment media. Let's start with your second question. So, international organizations on the ground. Tell me which ones are on the ground in eastern Aleppo. Yeah, okay, I'll tell you, there are none. There are none. These organizations are relying on the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, which is based in Coventry, UK, which is one man. They're relying on compromised groups like the White Helmets, which, let's talk about the White Helmets. The White Helmets were founded in 2013 by a British ex-military officer. They have been funded to the tune of $100 million by the US, UK, and Europe, and other states. They purport to be rescuing civilians in eastern Aleppo and Idlib, yet no one in eastern Aleppo has heard of them. And I say no one, bearing in mind that now 95% of these areas of eastern Aleppo are liberated. The White Helmets purport to be neutral, yet they can be found carrying guns and standing the dead bodies of Syrian soldiers. And their video footage actually contains children that have been recycled in different reports. You can find a girl named Aya who turns up in a report in month, say, August, and she turns up in the next month in 2 different locations. So they are not credible. The SOHR is not credible. Unnamed activists are not credible. Once or twice, maybe, but every time, not credible. So your sources on the ground, you don't have them. As for your agenda, not your, but the agenda of some corporate media, it is the agenda of regime change. How can the New York Times, I was reading it this morning, or how can Democracy Now!, which I was reading the other day, maintain until this day that this is a civil war in Syria? How can they maintain until this day that that the protests were unarmed and nonviolent until, say, 2012? That is absolutely not true. How can they maintain that the Syrian government is attacking civilians in Aleppo when every person that's coming out of these areas occupied by terrorists is saying the opposite? So that's with regards to your question on lying Western media. How do I quantify the support of the Syrian people? The elections. In 2014, the Syrian people held elections. The voter turnout was 88%, including people in Lebanon, where I was during the elections in Lebanon, which were actually ran for 2 days, extended hours, people walking for kilometers to reach the embassy, including people who flew from their own countries like mine, which has criminally shut the Syrian embassy so that Syrian people have no rights, and including people within Syria who braved a torrent of terrorist mortars and missiles on election day. And yet, voter turnout rate was something like 88%, I believe. And the election, the results were 78, I believe. I might. Okay, I might get the turnout wrong. So the results. 74 participate, 88. Okay. Anyway, the point being, overwhelmingly, the people support President Assad. That's based on elections, based on my own travels. Okay, so that's subjective. But as I said, I've traveled around Syria, talked with people of all faiths, all walks of life, and there are people that want change in the government. We're not pretending they don't want change. Everybody wants change. But in terms of support of the government, the point is they don't see President Assad as the problem.
Okay, I've heard enough. Now let me tell you what I think. I think once again the United States has overextended itself militarily. This military-industrial complex has got to be addressed. It's bad enough what we've done in Libya, removing Gaddafi, under whom Libya had the highest standard of living in all of Africa, let alone what we've done in Iraq, removing Saddam Hussein. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying either one of those men were saints, or should have remained in power indefinitely, but we see what this policy of regime changes brought us. Nothing but more chaos and more terrorism. Now we're moving into Syria, supporting ISIS there. Obama himself has said and admitted in a press conference that we are supporting the moderate rebels. I myself am not a pacifist, but I do not believe that these policies of regime change will bring us any good. But hey, that's just what I think. That's the way I think. If you agree, give me a like. If you disagree, leave a comment, share some information. Either way, subscribe, come back. We've got a lot to talk about, and I'd love your participation. Till next time, peace.
To the violence. They don't want this war to continue. They didn't ask for this war. But as my colleague stressed, Syria is a sovereign nation. It has the right to fight against terrorism. And we know that 101 of 193 UN member states have sent terrorists to Syria to slaughter and destroy. So Syria is fighting a war against terrorism. It's winning in Aleppo, and hopefully either the terrorists will accept a deal to be transported out of Aleppo, hopefully they will participate in the Musalaha, the reconciliation, will lay down their arms, will take the amnesty offered to them by the government and which has been taken by thousands of former militants. And hopefully, above all, the U.S. will stop supporting terrorism and stop funding terrorism. And hopefully this new bill will take fire, will be supported, and actually it will be impossible to fund an armed mercenaries from FSA, Ahrar al-Sham, Nuruddin al-Zinki, and all the colors in between, because they're all the same terrorists. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Very informative. Thank you very much. Now we are open to questions.